Hey there, welcome back to Sober Spring. This time we're going to continue to build on what we did in the last video. So if you haven't watched the last video, it's probably a good idea to go back and watch that one. So we're going to get to grips with more of what your purpose is, the things that are meaningful to you. And I want to build on what you did in the last video. So at the end of the last video, I asked you to write out 99 things that you might want to do, and hopefully you did that, and hopefully you had some sort of realization when you got to those big numbers, those 70s and 80s. That's probably when something that you thought was quite important and quite meaningful came to mind, and you thought, actually, you know what, I'd like to do that, but I haven't been paying enough attention to that. So we're going to focus in from these kind of vague ideas of what you want to do into really where you want to be going and what you want to be doing. Why do we want to do that? Well, the example I would use to kind of show how important that is Lord of the Rings. Of course, you've probably seen the films, watched the read the book. You might even be watching the new stuff on Amazon Prime, the Ring of Power stuff. You probably even saw The Hobbit as well. But you're probably familiar with that scene towards the end of the second book, where Frodo is in, in a situation where he's sort of attacked by Boromir. Boromir wants to steal the ring from him, and Frodo has this moment of doubt about all of the other people in the Fellowship of the Ring, and he reaches this conclusion that he has to go the rest of the distance on his own. He has to leave everybody else behind, and that's when he's runs off. Of course, you know, he's not able to get away from Sam, is he? So it ends up being just him and Sam that push their way on that kind of fine. Well, I say the final bit of the journey, but there's an entire another book after that, isn't there? So let's think about that decision that Frodo had to make there. Was that a difficult decision to make? You know, to leave behind all of the people that he'd come that far with? Yeah, of course it was. You know, was there a lot of him that was screaming, "Don't do it"? You know, don't leave behind the friendship and the comfort and the support there. Yeah, of course, I'm sure there was. So why did he do that? How was he able to make that really, really difficult decision? It was because he had absolute clarity of his objective. You know, he knew absolutely that the thing he had to do was get to Mount Doom and throw the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. He had a very, very clear objective. Now, look, one of the reasons, I guess, why we like stories is because they are clear and simple, and the objectives are always clear and simple. And life is always much more complicated than that. But I think we can do quite a lot to help it feel a bit less complicated, to create more of an objective, more of a point which our quest is moving towards, which our life is moving towards. So building on those things that you identified in the 99 things you like to do, you know, how can you move towards some of those things a little bit better? Well, I think you need to move from these kind of vague ideas of what you want to do into some values. So, the way you like to do things, the things that are important to you, and then move from those values into objectives. Now, where you will naturally move from those objectives is skills, because once you've identified your objectives, you will realize there are some skills that you will need to build on. So this is a process that I do every 3 months. I call it the VOB5 or VOB5, depending on my mood, but it's values, objectives, big fives. So I have 9 values. They revolve around things like family. You know, family's very important to me. It's very important to a lot of people, isn't it? You know, how do I want to show up and how do I want to interact with my wife, with my daughter, with my parents? So some of them are around family. Some of them are around the work that I do. Things like this. How do I want to show up on these videos? How do I want to write? How do I want to speak? How do I want to impact the world? And some of them are about my own physical fitness and my well-being and my wellness and all of those kind of things. So I distilled it down into 9 sort of fairly pithy sentences about what I how I want to interact. And I think that is a good way of starting out. You know, you can think about those broad headings, can't you? Like family, like community, like friendship, like work, like physical health, like hobbies. You can think about all of those kind of things and, you know, write a few ideas for each of those sections and then, you know, pull out the ones that are most important and then order them. So the way I order them is not necessarily in their in the order of importance. I put at the top the ones where I don't think I'm reaching those values as much as I should. So the first ones are always the ones where I think I need to do more work. At the bottom tend to be the ones that I think I'm performing fairly well on. So there's the values. From my values come objectives. So there are lots of different ways of setting goals and objectives, and I'm not going to go into them in too much detail. If you want to, there is an awful lot of information on the internet about how to do that. There are an awful lot of opinions out there as well. What I tend to do is I tend to have goals for the year, and then I try and work out what I do over the next 3 months to get myself closer to, or ideally achieve, those goals. The goals vary. Some of them are ongoing. So, for example, I want to finish writing a book that I'm writing this year, and that is something that is just about plugging away. It's about doing it kind of every day. Some of one of them is about savings and, you know, what I do with my money, and that is a kind of a constant thing that I look at once a month and I do a bit of work on. So I've got the kind of daily ongoing ones, and I've got the more kind of monthly general ongoing ones. And then one of them was I wanted to break a world record, which I already did. So it's quite nice. I mean, that took up pretty much the first 4 months of the year, and it was a big thing. But now it's done. It's done. So those are the kind of objectives. I would say 3 to 5 really big objectives is probably the right sort of number that you want. And then from those objectives, you're going to realize that you're going to need to develop some skills. So I like to think of them as the big five. I think I read that in some self-help book at some point. Brendan Burchard or Robin Sharma or one of that lot talks about the big fives, the skills that you want to develop in your life. I like it because it's the big five, you know, the safari animals you're supposed to see when you're in Africa. Anyway, it appeals to my brain. So, what are the big five skills that you need to be working on to help you to achieve those objectives? So, for me, there is always an awful lot of speaking and writing in my work. So, those are two very, very important skills. Of late, my work has been more about building partnerships and leadership. So, those are the other two. And being an awesome husband, father, and son is pretty much an ongoing skill that you know I'm working on, and that's, you know, supremely important to me. So those are the big five skills that I've got. So that's what I would suggest you do. Look at those 99 things that you wanted to do, create a list of your values, based on, you know, those and how what that's inspired you. Maybe list out 9 values. Then think about your objectives, 3 to 5 objectives that you want to achieve in the next, or you could do the next year. So that would be, you know, up until this time next year, or you could do in the remainder of this year, whatever you think best based on your objectives. I mean, if some of them are really big, then maybe you're not going to be able to achieve them by the end of this year, but the end of next year, but this time next year maybe. And then finally, look at those big five skills, those skills that you're going to need to develop to uh, you know, fulfill those objectives. So, look, what I've just given you is a whole load of work. I appreciate that, but it is something that really will serve you well. It is something that will help you to understand yourself and deepen that connection with yourself. It will build an awful lot of self awareness, and it will make life a lot easier for you, because once you know where you're going, you know which road you have to take. So I'll see you on the next video. Thanks very much for listening.